Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. We live in a world where so much of our worth seems to come from external validation, how others see us, how we measure up to the expectations set by society, or the roles we're expected to play. But I want to talk to you today about something far more powerful, the idea that who we are is not for negotiation. Too often, we fall into the trap of shrinking ourselves to fit into a mold that others have created. We put on masks to meet expectations, hide our imperfections, or people please our way through life. But here's the hard truth: when we negotiate who we are choosing to disconnect from our own truth, from our own worth. And that's a dangerous game. So here are 5 key points to remember as we navigate this world and stay true to who we are. There's a deep and profound power in owning your story, the narrative of your life, with all its twists, turns, triumphs, and hard edges. So often we find ourselves trying to outrun our past, hide from the parts of our story that make us uncomfortable, or gloss over the moments that feel too painful to revisit. But what if I told you that your story, every single part of it, is not just worth owning, but is your greatest source of strength? We all carry the weight of our experiences with us, whether we acknowledge it or not. Some of us may try to tuck parts of our history into the corners of our minds, pretending it never happened, wishing it were different. But the truth is, our past doesn't define us in the way we often think it does. It shapes us, yes, but it doesn't determine who we are now or who we are becoming. There's a common misconception that to be successful, to be liked, or to be worthy of love, we must have a story that is neat, clean, and free of flaws. We're told to present an image of success, the glossy highlight reel that shows only the good parts. But when we do that, we rob ourselves of the richness of our experience. The mistakes, the failures, the heartbreaks, they are just as much a part of who we are as our successes and victories. And without them, we would never have grown. Without those tough moments, we wouldn't have learned the lessons that bring us wisdom, resilience, and compassion. To own your story means to stop running from those difficult chapters and instead accept them as integral parts of your journey. It's about embracing the parts of your story that make you feel vulnerable and seeing them for what they are, stepping stones to your strength. Your failures don't diminish your worth. In fact, they reveal your courage, your ability to rise after being knocked down, your capacity for growth. Owning your story also means letting go of the need for validation from others. So often we look outside of ourselves for approval, trying to fit ourselves into the mold of someone else's expectations. But when we seek validation externally, we hand over the reins of our own lives to other people. We let their opinions, whether positive or negative, become the measuring stick for our self-worth. But when you own your story, you reclaim that power. You no longer need anyone else's permission to be who you are. Your worth is not defined by their judgment. It's not up for negotiation. Owning your story means standing in the truth of your experience without shame or apology. It's about speaking your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And let me be clear, this isn't about telling the world every intimate detail of your life. It's about being honest with yourself, knowing your worth, and embracing the truth of your experiences. It's about accepting yourself fully, flaws and all, and saying, this is me, I am enough just as I am, and my story is powerful. When you own your story, you also give others permission to own theirs. One of the most beautiful things about sharing our vulnerabilities is that it creates space for others to be vulnerable too. It says, it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to have pain. It's okay to not have it all figured out when we stop hiding behind facades and start sharing the messy, imperfect parts of ourselves. We invite connection on a deeper level. We allow others to see that they're not alone in their struggles, and in turn, we create a community rooted in understanding and compassion. And finally, owning your story means you get to define your narrative moving forward. Yes, we cannot change the past, but we have the power to shape how it affects us today and tomorrow. The lessons you've learned, the growth you've experienced, and the person you've become are all part of a new chapter. You are not defined by the mistakes you made or the times you stumbled. You are defined by how you choose to show up today, by the choices you make moving forward, and by the love and compassion you extend to yourself and others. So own your story. Don't let anyone else dictate who you are or what your life means. Stand tall in the fullness of your experiences, embrace the parts that have hurt you, and celebrate the parts that have made you stronger. Because your story is uniquely yours and it is worthy of being lived out loud, unapologetically. The world needs you to show up as the full, unfiltered, imperfectly, perfectly perfect version of yourself, and that is the most powerful thing you can do. Vulnerability is one of those concepts that many of us struggle with. We live in a world that prizes strength, independence, and self-sufficiency. We're often told that to be strong, we need to be tough to keep our emotions in check, to never let others see us sweat, to guard our hearts and minds as if showing any sign of fragility would make us weak. This societal narrative tells us that vulnerability is something to be avoided, something that exposes us to hurt, judgment, or failure. But here's the truth: vulnerability is not a weakness. In fact, it is one of the greatest strengths we can possess. At its core, vulnerability is the courage to show up and be seen, to be real, to be imperfect, and to be human. It's the willingness to let others see our hearts, our fears, our dreams, and even our scars. It's about showing the world our rawest, truest selves without the protection of armor or the shields of perfectionism. And that takes incredible strength. When we talk about vulnerability, it's important to understand that it isn't about being fragile or exposed in a way that leaves us defenseless. Vulnerability isn't the same as weakness. It's the strength to be authentic, to allow ourselves to experience life fully, even in the face of uncertainty, fear, or pain. It's the decision to show up as we are without pretending to be something we're not, even when doing so feels risky. You see, vulnerability is not about putting yourself in a position where you're completely unprotected. It's about giving others the opportunity to see and connect with the person you truly are. It's about sharing your true emotions and thoughts with the people around you, even when it feels uncomfortable. It's saying, this is me, this is what I feel, this is what I believe, and I'm not afraid to share it. Being vulnerable means acknowledging that we are human. And it's that humanity, that willingness to embrace our imperfections, that allows us to form deep, meaningful connections with others. The more we hide behind walls of perfection, the more isolated we become. We think that by protecting ourselves from pain or judgment, we can avoid hurt. But in reality, we also shut ourselves off from the possibility of true connection, joy, and understanding. Vulnerability is the key to intimacy, trust, and emotional connection. It's how we connect with others on a soul-deep level. Think about the moments in your life where you've truly connected with someone. I'm willing to bet that those moments involve vulnerability, a shared experience where both people opened up, shared their fears, dreams, or struggles. It's through vulnerability that we find common ground, that we discover we are not so different after all, and that we realize we are not alone in our experiences. And this isn't just about connecting with others, it's also about connecting with ourselves. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we give ourselves permission to truly feel, to experience joy, love, and even sadness in its fullness. Without vulnerability, we miss out on the depth of what it means to be human. Vulnerability is also the birthplace of courage. It's the willingness to take risks, to fail, and to get back up again. When we're vulnerable, we acknowledge the possibility of failure, but we also recognize that failure is not the end. It's a part of growth. When we take risks and step into the unknown, we expose ourselves to the possibility of rejection, judgment, or disappointment. But it's through these experiences that we learn, grow, and become stronger. Vulnerability, in its essence, is about embracing that uncertainty with courage. It's about saying, I am not afraid to be myself, even if it means I may stumble along the way. In fact, the most successful and resilient people are often those who are the most willing to embrace vulnerability. They are not afraid to fail because they understand that failure doesn't define them, it refines them. They don't shy away from difficult emotions or uncomfortable conversations because they know that it is in those spaces where true growth happens. Vulnerability makes us resilient because it allows us to bounce back, to learn from our mistakes, and to continue moving forward with even greater wisdom. I know that vulnerability can feel risky. It can feel like a leap into the unknown, a step into a place where we can be hurt or misunderstood. But let's be clear, the biggest risk we take is the risk of never being vulnerable at all. The biggest risk is the decision to hold back, to hide behind walls, to keep ourselves protected from the very experiences that will allow us to grow, learn, and connect with the world around us. The true power in vulnerability lies not in how we avoid pain, but in how we show up in spite of it. And here's another truth: when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we also give others the permission to do the same. Vulnerability is contagious. When we show up authentically, we encourage others to do the same. We create spaces where people feel safe enough to share their own truths, their own fears, and their own dreams. We invite connection, understanding, and compassion into our lives and the lives of those around us. When we embrace vulnerability, we create a culture of openness and courage. So let's stop viewing vulnerability as a weakness. Let's recognize it for what it truly is: a powerful act of courage, a gateway to authentic connection, and a source of deep personal strength. When we embrace vulnerability, we embrace life, all of it, with all its messiness, beauty, and complexity. And in doing so, we become more resilient, more compassionate, and more human. Let's be brave enough to show up, to be seen, and to be vulnerable. Because in the end, it is in vulnerability that we find our true power. In a world where we're constantly bombarded with demands, expectations, and the pressures to please others, it can feel like an act of rebellion to set boundaries, especially boundaries that reflect our own sense of worth. But here's the hard truth: setting boundaries isn't just an act of self-care, it's an act of self-respect. It's the foundation of how we protect our energy, our time, and our well-being. And when we fail to set healthy boundaries, we allow others to define how we show up in the world, and that can lead to burnout, resentment, and a loss of self. The first step in setting boundaries that truly reflect your worth is understanding that your needs matter. Your time, your energy, your emotions, they are precious, and they deserve to be honored. Too often, we fall into the trap of people-pleasing, thinking that saying yes to everything or everyone will make us liked, accepted, or valued. But in reality, this only leads to exhaustion and frustration. When you constantly put the needs of others above your own, you're telling yourself that you are not worthy of the same care and respect you offer to others. But here's the thing: you are worthy. Your time and energy are valuable. And setting boundaries is a way of showing that to yourself and the world. Boundaries are not walls. Many people misunderstand boundaries as something that isolates us, that pushes others away, or that is inherently negative. But boundaries are not walls, they are protective lines drawn with love and respect. They create space for you to thrive, to honor your needs, and to make room for what matters most in your life. When you set a boundary, you are not shutting someone out or rejecting them. Instead, you are telling them, this is what I need to show up as my best self. This is how I can be present for you without losing myself in the process. I think of it like this: when you put on an oxygen mask on an airplane, they always tell you to put yours on first before helping others. Why? Because if you don't care for yourself, you won't have the strength to care for anyone else. Similarly, your boundaries are a way of making sure you are in a position to give the best of yourself to others, to your work, to your relationships, and to your own well-being. Know what you value and make that your guide. Boundaries are deeply personal, and they come from a clear understanding of what you value most in life. When you know what matters to you, whether it's your time, your mental health, your relationships, or your career, you can set boundaries that align with those values. For instance, if you value your time and well-being, you may need to set a boundary around how much time you're willing to dedicate to work or social events so you don't sacrifice your peace for the sake of pleasing others. If you value your emotional health, you may need to set boundaries in relationships to protect yourself from toxic dynamics. It's important to recognize that your boundaries are not rigid rules, but fluid and adaptable guidelines that shift depending on the circumstances. They are a reflection of your self-respect and your commitment to living in alignment with your values. The more clearly you understand what you value, the more confidently you can establish boundaries that honor those values. Setting boundaries requires courage. Setting boundaries that reflect your worth often takes immense courage, especially if you've spent years living without them or if the people around you aren't used to you asserting your needs. It can feel uncomfortable at first to say no, to push back, or to ask for what you need. But here's the truth: the discomfort you feel in setting a boundary is temporary. The long-term peace, clarity, and sense of empowerment that come from standing firm in your boundaries will far outweigh the initial discomfort. When we don't set boundaries, we often end up feeling resentful, overwhelmed, or even invisible. By refusing to protect our own time and space, we allow others to infringe upon them, and eventually we lose sight of what we truly want and need. But setting boundaries is an act of honoring yourself. It's a way of saying, I matter. My needs matter. My well-being matters. Boundaries teach others how to treat you. Another important aspect of boundaries is that they are a tool for teaching others how to treat you. People can only respect what we model for them. If we consistently say yes when we mean no, or if we allow others to overstep our limits without consequence, we are teaching them that our needs don't matter. Setting clear boundaries helps others understand where you stand and what you are and are not willing to accept. It's a way of demonstrating self-respect, and in turn, it invites others to treat you with the same respect. Setting boundaries also gives others permission to set their own. By honoring your own needs, you create a ripple effect of self-respect in your relationships, work, and community. Boundaries are an invitation for everyone to be authentic and honest about their own limits. They open up space for people to communicate openly and for relationships to evolve in healthier, more sustainable ways. Learn to say no. One of the most powerful tools in setting boundaries is the simple word no yet for many of us. Saying no can feel impossible. We fear disappointing others, hurting feelings, or creating conflict. But here's the reality: saying no is not a rejection of the person or the request. It's a declaration that your needs and well-being come first. Saying no is an affirmation that you are worthy of space, time, and peace. It's an act of empowerment, not selfishness. When we say yes to everything, we're often saying no to ourselves. We're saying no to our own peace, our own priorities, and our own needs. Learning to say no with grace and clarity is one of the most powerful things you can do to protect your energy and preserve your sense of self. Boundaries aren't always easy to maintain. There will be times when maintaining your boundaries will feel challenging. People may try to test them or push against them, especially if they are used to you being available at all times or putting their needs before your own. But this is where you must remind yourself that your boundaries are a reflection of your worth. The more consistently you enforce your boundaries, the more you will reinforce your sense of self-respect and establish your identity as someone who honors their needs. In the long run, setting boundaries isn't just about protecting yourself from burnout or overextending yourself. It's about preserving the things that matter most to you. It's about making space for the things that fuel your soul, your passions, and your growth. And by doing so, you create a life that is not just lived for others, but one that is lived with intention, authenticity, and balance. So don't hesitate. Set boundaries that reflect your worth. Protect your time, your energy, and your peace. And remember that you deserve to live in a way that honors the most important person in your life, you. Perfectionism is often hailed as a virtue in our society, a trait that's celebrated in workplaces, schools, and even in personal relationships. We're told that perfectionism is a sign of high standards, dedication, and an unwillingness to settle for mediocrity. On the surface, it looks like a shield, an armor that protects us from failure, judgment, and criticism. But in reality, perfectionism is not a shield, it's a mask. And it's one that conceals our true selves, keeps us from embracing growth, and ultimately holds us back from the richness of life. The idea of perfectionism comes from the belief that if we can just get everything right, if we can just show up perfectly, then we'll be safe, we'll be accepted, we'll be loved. The truth, however, is that perfectionism doesn't offer protection. It creates a barrier between us and the things we actually need: vulnerability, connection, and authenticity. When we try to be perfect, we are not showing up as our true selves. Instead, we're presenting an idealized version of who we think we should be, one that is free of flaws, mistakes, or imperfections. Perfectionism requires us to suppress parts of ourselves that might be messy, uncertain, or emotional, and instead forces us to project an image of control, competence, and certainty. It's a way of controlling how others perceive us, because deep down we fear that if they see our true selves, if they see our mistakes, our weaknesses, or our struggles, they might not love or accept us. But here's the paradox: the more we hide behind the mask of perfectionism, the less we allow others to see us, truly see us in our fullness. The more we focus on getting everything just right, the more disconnected we become from the parts of ourselves that make us human. And ironically, the less likely we are to form genuine, authentic connections with others. Real intimacy and connection are built on vulnerability, not perfection. And when we wear a mask of perfectionism, we are shutting out the very thing that allows us to connect with others in meaningful ways. Perfectionism also traps us in a cycle of constant striving, never allowing us to experience satisfaction or joy in our accomplishments. When we are constantly chasing perfection, no matter how well we do, it's never enough. There's always something more to fix, something more to improve, something that's just not quite right. This relentless pursuit of perfection keeps us in a state of anxiety and stress. It robs us of the ability to celebrate our successes because we are always looking ahead, always trying to do better, always believing that we can somehow be more, but the truth is, perfection is an illusion. It doesn't exist. No matter how much we achieve or how flawless we appear to others, there will always be something else to chase. And in doing so, we lose sight of what truly matters: the process, the learning, the growth. Perfectionism also limits our creativity. When we demand perfection from ourselves, we limit our willingness to experiment, to take risks, or to try something new. Creativity requires a certain level of freedom, of space to fail, to make mistakes, and to grow. Perfectionism, however, creates a box, a rigid framework where we are only willing to step if we know we can succeed. And that's not how creativity works. Creativity requires courage, and courage requires us to let go of the need to control the outcome. It requires us to be willing to fail and to see failure as a step toward growth, not as something to be avoided at all costs. Furthermore, perfectionism keeps us stuck in self-criticism. When we can't live up to our impossibly high standards, we turn inward and berate ourselves. Instead of learning from our mistakes, we punish ourselves for them, convincing ourselves that we are not good enough, not worthy of success, not deserving of love or acceptance. This inner dialogue of self-criticism feeds our shame, and shame, in turn, keeps us from being open, from being authentic, and from accepting ourselves as we are. It creates an endless loop where we're constantly striving, constantly failing, and constantly telling ourselves we are not enough. But the truth is, no one is perfect. We all make mistakes. We all have flaws. And those imperfections are what make us uniquely human. When we stop striving for perfection and allow ourselves to embrace imperfection, we open up the space for true growth. We give ourselves permission to learn, to make mistakes, and to evolve. Instead of hiding behind the mask of perfectionism, we can step into the fullness of who we are with all our flaws, our struggles, and our strengths. This is where true transformation happens. When we let go of perfection, we allow ourselves to be seen, to be loved, and to be understood for who we really are. Perfectionism also often leads to burnout. When we try to be perfect in everything, we stretch ourselves too thin, we overcommit, overwork, and push ourselves past our limits because we believe that we have to do it all and do it perfectly. This constant pressure can take a physical and emotional toll, leaving us exhausted, disengaged, and disconnected from our true selves. It's only when we drop the need for perfection that we can create space for balance and peace. We start to recognize that we don't have to do everything perfectly, and that our worth isn't tied to our productivity or output. Our worth is inherent. It doesn't need to be earned through flawless performance. In reality, embracing imperfection allows us to live more authentically, more fully, and more peacefully. When we stop hiding behind the mask of perfectionism, we give ourselves the freedom to be human, to embrace the messiness of life, to experience joy in our imperfections, and to build connections based on realness, not on an image we've created to protect ourselves from judgment. And that's when we begin to experience true freedom, the freedom to be ourselves, just as we are, without apology. In a world that constantly tells us to do more, be more, and achieve more, it's easy to forget a fundamental truth: you are enough. From the moment we are born, we are bombarded with messages about who we should be, what we should look like, how we should behave, and what we should accomplish in order to be worthy of love, respect, and success. The pressure to meet these expectations can feel overwhelming, and over time, it starts to erode our sense of self. We begin to believe that we are not enough, that we need to change, improve, or somehow become more in order to be worthy. But here's the truth that we need to internalize: you are enough right now as you are. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love and respect. You don't need to have it all together to deserve happiness. You are enough simply because you exist. There is no checklist of accomplishments or qualities that you must tick off to earn your worth. Your worth is inherent. It's not conditional on what you do, what you have, or what others think of you. The pressure to constantly improve or perform at a high level can be exhausting. We live in a culture that thrives on achievement, productivity, and external validation. Success is often measured by how much we do, how much we have, and how others perceive us. We are told that we must always be striving, always be pushing ourselves to the next goal, the next promotion, the next milestone. But in the midst of this hustle, it's easy to lose sight of the most important truth of all: you are enough, just as you are. Your worth is not dependent on what you accomplish, what you look like, or how much you can give to others. It is not measured by external achievements, but by your inherent value as a human being. We also need to recognize that we are enough without the need for constant comparison to others. Social media, magazines, advertisements, and even our peers often present a curated version of reality, one where everyone seems to have it together, where lives appear flawless, and where success is depicted as an endpoint to be reached. But this is a distortion of reality. No one has everything figured out. No one is perfect. And the more we compare ourselves to others, the more we reinforce the belief that we aren't enough. When we constantly measure ourselves against someone else's journey, we forget that we are on our own unique path. We forget that our worth is not dependent on being someone else or having what someone else has. You are enough in your own right, just as you are, with your unique story, your struggles, your victories, and your flaws. Another key element to understanding that you are enough is accepting your imperfections. Our flaws, our mistakes, and our vulnerabilities do not make us less worthy of love or belonging. In fact, it is in our imperfections that we find our humanity. Perfection is an illusion. It's a standard that doesn't exist, and the pursuit of it often leads us to feel inadequate, unworthy, or incomplete. But the truth is, we are already complete. Our imperfections are what make us real, make us relatable, and make us who we are. They don't take away from our worth, they add depth to our character and strength to our resilience. Embracing our imperfections is a crucial part of accepting that we are enough, because when we stop trying to hide or fix our flaws, we can finally show up as our authentic selves. The idea of being enough also ties into the concept of self-compassion. Often we are our harshest critics. We judge ourselves for every mistake, every misstep, and every shortcoming. We believe that if we could just be better, do better, or achieve more, we would finally be enough. But self-compassion invites us to be kind to ourselves, to forgive ourselves for our mistakes, and to recognize that we are doing the best we can. It's about treating ourselves with the same love, care, and understanding that we would offer to a friend. Self-compassion is an act of recognizing that, despite our flaws, despite our imperfections, we are worthy of love and acceptance exactly as we are. It's also important to realize that you are enough not because you don't have room to grow, but because growth doesn't negate your worth. Growth is a natural part of being human. We all have areas in our lives where we want to improve, whether it's in our careers, our relationships, or our personal development. But improvement is not about becoming enough, it's about becoming more of who we already are. Growth is about self-discovery and evolution, not about fixing something that is inherently broken. You are not a project to be completed or an ideal to be achieved. You are a person worthy of love, respect, and happiness, and any growth you pursue should come from a place of honoring yourself, not trying to fill a perceived gap in your worth. And yet we often feel the need to justify our worth through accomplishments, accolades, and external recognition. It's as if we need proof to show that we are worthy of love, acceptance, or success. But your worth is not something that can be quantified. It is not something that can be measured by the number of likes on a social media post, the awards on your shelf, or the praise of others. Your worth is inherent and unchanging, regardless of what you achieve or what others think. You are worthy because you exist. You are worthy because you are human. You are enough simply because you are. Embracing the idea that you are enough is liberating. It means that you no longer have to chase an unattainable ideal of perfection or success. You can stop striving for approval, for validation, or for external measures of worth. Instead, you can begin to live a life that is authentic, fulfilling, and aligned with who you truly are. When you recognize that you are enough, you stop giving power to the outside world to determine your value. You take back control of your narrative, and you create space for self-acceptance, self-love, and inner peace. You free yourself from the need to prove anything to anyone, and you allow yourself to simply be. In the end, the most important thing you can do is to believe in your worth. It's not something you have to earn or work for, it's something you already possess. You are enough right now just as you are. And when you truly accept that, you'll begin to live with greater confidence, freedom, and joy. In a world that constantly pushes us to do more, be more, and prove ourselves, it's vital to remember the most important truth: you are enough. Perfectionism, external validation, and the pressure to conform may make us feel like we need to be flawless to be worthy, but the reality is that our inherent worth isn't defined by what we achieve or how others see us. It's defined by who we are, just as we are flaws, imperfections, and all. Embracing our vulnerability, setting boundaries that reflect our value, and letting go of the mask of perfectionism allows us to show up as our authentic selves. We don't need to hide behind any facade for an unattainable ideal. When we accept that we are enough, we create space for growth, connection, and real fulfillment. So today, let's choose to honor ourselves as we are, to release the weight of comparison, and to give ourselves the grace to be imperfect. Because in our imperfection lies our strength, in our vulnerability lies our power, and in accepting ourselves, we find the freedom to live fully, authentically, and unapologetically. You are enough always.